Hello and welcome to the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, and today we have an old friend of the show, a very, very, very special guest. This young man was formerly in the Colorado House of Representatives, was the Speaker of the House there, went on to serve as Governor Polis's Chief of Staff before leaving public service last year. It is the one and only man I know in politics, or formerly in politics, Alec Garnett. Alec, really appreciate the time. How's it going?
Adam, I'm pumped to be here. I listen to your podcast every week, and I'm a proud member of Establish the Run for all the fantasy goodness that you guys provide. So this is an honor. I will say that another part of my background is I placed the first DraftKings bet in Colorado history.
Yes, and for those that don't know, Alec played a big role in getting all of the gambling legislation going and regulated and everything through here in Colorado. So I thought he was a really good person to have because on today's show, we're going to talk through some of the recent legislation and regulation that's affecting the gambling and fantasy community across our country. I know there are tons more topics out there related to this, but the three big ones that I want to hit are first, the gambling tax change in the big, beautiful bill. Second, the situation in California with the attorney general opinion and the tribes. And lastly, the per bet tax enacted by the state of Illinois, which could spread as well. So, Alec, let's start with the big, beautiful bill. Just to give a quick summary here, at the very last minute, one line was inserted into that 940-page bill. And the line said, gamblers can only deduct 90% of their annual losses instead of 100%. That's it. So let's say you have $100,000 in wins betting on sports in 2026, and you have $100,000 in losses for a net profit of zero. By the letter of this new law, you would actually owe taxes on $10,000. I mean, call me crazy, Alec. Taxing on no actual income, on phantom income, seems unfair, un-American, ridiculous. I have my take on how this got into the bill, but I'm curious how or why you think this happened and any more thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, I think we were all surprised to see it just sort of pop up, and I think part of this you have to go back to the risk that the federal government has ceased to function properly. Literally, it goes back 20 years, but essentially, what we've created is an environment where if there is split control and there's not one party control, it's really hard to get anything done because you can't just go through the normal process. And the normal process is meant to make sure that the American people know what's in the legislation making its way through Congress before the president signs it into law so that they can weigh in and make sure that their representatives in Congress know how they feel about it. But what it's broken down to in DC is it's so dysfunctional that the only way you can get anything done is when one party has a trifecta, and then they use this reconciliation process, which is like building a huge omnibus bill that they can only get things done by passing one bill, and they load it up with a bunch of stuff. They Christmas tree it, and they move it through the House, and they move it through the Senate. And the reason the reconciliation process is used is because instead of having to hit the 60 vote filibuster threshold in the Senate, they can just hit a simple majority. And so that's why they do it, because the Republicans don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So in the House passed bill, this language wasn't in there. And then it went to the Senate. And I think most people who were watching, and I was certainly watching for a bunch of other reasons, thought, well, the majority of the 435 member U.S. House is so slim. The Speaker Johnson can only lose 3 votes, that whatever they pass in the House is going to be what the Senate has to adopt and then send to the president. But instead, what happened is it went to the Senate, and Majority Leader Thune allowed his caucus to really dive in there and dig in. It changed a ton, and then it came back to the House, and the president had set this July 4th deadline as having to get it through, which left Speaker Johnson like 3 days to pass this 900-page bill. And I believe that rank and file members of the Republican caucus were so fearful of what would happen from people on Twitter, from the president, if they were to come out and say no and vote no, that they didn't want to take any time to dig in to see what those changes were. So they kind of rubber stamped the Senate version. It went to the president. But in that rubber stamped version was this language that, I think you've seen Representative Titus from Nevada saying, I'm going to introduce an individual bill to go and try to solve this problem. And we can talk about how there's a lot of problems in this bill and kind of what the chances are of making those changes. But then it went to the president. They met the July 4th deadline. He signed it on July 4th. It is now the law of the land. And I think that a lot of members of Congress didn't know what was in it.
Okay. What was the motivation to get this in? And I have some thoughts, but out of everything going on in our country, to come up with something like this, it seems like
Yeah.
nobody's like taking credit for it either. There's no Republican or Democrat out there being like, I made sure to get this in, and this is why. Like, we don't even know exactly why or what happened. So do you have any guesses as to how or why this line got into this bill about gambling?
Well, I had to kind of dig into it a little bit, and I'll throw out a theory that I don't think it's conspiratorial because a lot of the mainstream media is kind of writing about it. But one of Trump's sons came on to be an advisor for Kalshi, which I'm just like a basic sports bettor, right? I'm not into sports trading. I had to kind of look up what this new kind of trading website is. But he came on in January to become an advisor, and it sounds to me like he kind of got really involved in this because he was trading. You can trade on politics, so he was trading on the presidential election last year. It worked out well. The only thing I can think of, because this is such a change in precedent in taxation around betting for the history of America, that
Mm-hmm.
the only thing I can think of is that this gives this new trading platform a strategic advantage because they aren't treated the same. And if you get to a place where the whales are being treated differently, and I think this change really is going to impact people who this is their livelihood. And so two unintended or maybe intended consequences are going to come out of it. One is it's going to lift up these new platforms that exist. And people are going to start trying to figure out how to trade in this space instead of straight sports bet, or it's going to push people offshores and into the dark markets again, which is the whole reason why we've tried to legalize sports betting in the country. So all the topics we'll talk about today, I think, have that unintended or intended. It's probably unintended consequence. But the only thing I can think of, because no one's taking credit, I think the American Gaming Association's been eerily quiet about it, which was kind of bizarre to me. But is the sort of the rise of these new trading platforms in some of the associations with the White House that folks have with them.
Okay. That could be. I have a other guess that is just more straightforward. My take is that these people in Congress that represent us, they don't really understand what they're doing, which is understandable because there's a lot more important things all the time. And in this bill, you can't be an expert on everything. But I just think they thought, well, we need to find some money somewhere, right? We need to find $1 billion somewhere or whatever. Gambling is a sin. No one will care if we just take some money there without ever thinking through the consequences of this, the second or third order effects that you talk about, people going offshore or to bookies or people getting taxed on phantom income. I just think they're so incompetent and they're like, we need money. Gambling is a sin. Let's just tax these people a little bit more. Is that a crazy thought that these
No,
representatives don't really understand the nuance across all these things that they in theory are supposed to?
it's a lot less sexier than my idea, but yeah, I think, because if you think about it, the way reconciliation works, which we talked about just a second ago, is that it's supposed to be a budget bill. So any revenue reduction that's coming into the federal government, you have to offset it with a revenue raiser. So that's why, like the 30,000 foot level of this bill, and the way that the public has been talking about it is Congress wanted to extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017 permanently. They
Mm-hmm.
also wanted to increase the number of tax reductions in tax for overtime and for tips, and so they had to essentially pay for all of those cuts. So then they went into the big one that everyone's talking about is Medicaid, SNAP benefits, Those are the kind of the big ticket items. But you are correct in the sense that a billion here or a billion there matters. And I think this adds up to about $1 billion.
Yeah.
And so it does matter in terms of trying to find revenue. And I do, I think it's fair to say that, people don't quite, especially members of Congress who are in their 70s, don't quite understand how much the sports betting world has changed in just the last few years since COVID across the country.
Yeah, well, I also don't think they're actually going to get $1 billion from this because they don't account for people changing their behavior. In other words, some people might not report. Some pros might stop. People who file as professional gamblers might just stop being a professional gambler altogether or something like that and get a different job and not file for their big wins or their big winning years anymore. So I actually don't think they're going to make $1 billion from that. By the way, everyone should consult with their own accountant on all this tax stuff and the fallout from the BBB. From what I can tell, salary cap DFS is not going to be affected by this. You get 1099 miscellaneous on net from DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever DFS site you win $600+ on in a calendar year. I expect that to continue. So DFS players will pay on net income for the year. But again, please talk to your CPA, especially if you're betting sports a lot or poker stuff as well. I guess the last part of this, Alec, is what can people do, right? It's really easy to say, call your representative, write your representative, email your representative. You've been with all these people. You've been with the governor, et cetera. Does it actually matter if I'm sitting here tweeting my face off at my representative? Does it actually matter if I'm calling the office and emailing them all the time?
The answer is yes. It definitely matters. I know that it feels hopeless at moments, but it definitely matters. There are, I think it's worth, so there's a couple things. One, Representative Titus from Nevada, she is going to come out with a counter proposal that reverses this. And so it's going to be called My Fair Bet. I don't think I see a bill number yet, but she is going to take sort of the lead on this. There is a Congressional Gaming Association or a caucus in Washington, and if you just Google Congressional Gaming Caucus, it comes up with this long list of representatives who I think understand this industry more than most and are a good place for people to, I think, find some leaders who can kind of lead on this issue. And then I think that the second way is to think through, is there a way for individual states to decouple they can at least decouple the state's income tax from the federal. And so there might be a way not to be kind of hit as hard. That's not gonna solve the problem. But that's one thing to think about. But I do think reaching out to your member of Congress to encourage them to sign on as a co-sponsor to Representative Titus's Fair Bet Act. And the more co-sponsors that she can get, the more power she can show is behind this fix. I think the challenge is going to be there's a lot of poorly written provisions in this bill. I think what I've seen in the past is the partisanship starts to get the Democrats won't let Republicans fix the problems that are in there because they want it to be as bad as possible so that they can run for re-election and try to gain the majority in November of 2026 on the mistakes that were in that bill. I think the goal here is for the community to come together and try to separate this out from the other problems in it and say, this one really is a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't be partisan. We need to fix this. Let's all sign on as co-sponsors to Representative Titus's technical fix to the big, beautiful bill.
I mean, my first thought was like nothing ever gets done in Washington. No way that this is ever going to get done. But there's been articles in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. It's been covered on national news. It's going viral on TikTok and Twitter. So maybe there's a chance. And yes, please do what Alex said. Get on these people about this phantom tax situation. All right, let's go to topic 2, the situation in California. So DFS fantasy has been running fine without issue for the last decade plus in California. Just last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, comes out with an opinion that fantasy sports for money are illegal in that state. The assumption is that this opinion out of nowhere seemingly stems from the Native American tribes who have donated tons of money to the Attorney General there and understandably want to protect their gambling monopoly in California. this is state level. This is where you worked, Alec. What happened here? How did this happen? Does it matter that the AG has come out with this opinion in California?
Yeah, it matters. California is kind of a mess when it comes to sports betting. I think the relationship with the tribes makes it really complicated. We have a little bit of that in Colorado, but not to the degree as you see in California. Now, I think what happened here is that there are. I think what the challenge here is that fantasy sports generally are being kind of caught under under some of the new games that are out. The
Yeah.
pick'em and the draft style contests are more closely related, right, to sports betting than the classic DraftKings and FanDuel games that we
Yeah.
all kind of grew up on. We experienced this in Colorado where our regulator came in and said these particular games don't don't count as fantasy sports, they count as sports betting. And there was a big regulatory discussion about those specific games. And I kind of removed myself from the situation when I was chief of staff for the governor. And there was a broad conversation without me about it between the Division of Gaming and the operators. And they worked it out. And there was a few changes made to the games to make sure that they fit the statutory definition of fantasy sports.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's happening in California is that there may need to be a few changes, right, to some of these games to make sure that they fit the definition of fantasy sports. But the AG seems to me like against the opinion of Governor Newsom has sort of come out and kind of lumped everything together. Yeah. So I think that Gavin Newsom, he said, I disagree with the AG's decision, and I want to set a table to kind of bring people together to figure this out. I don't think that this is that hard to figure out, and I don't think that all of fantasy sports should be kind of caught in this broader net. And I think if there needs to be a discussion that includes the tribes, I think that table should be set, and we should be able to California should be able to navigate this without, I think, shutting everything down. And the AG's opinion doesn't carry the force of law, so the legislature is going to have to get involved and I think again, be part of that broader stakeholder discussion that Gavin Newsom's going to set up. But it was way too broad of a decision. And in politics, you always follow the money. And I think it's totally fair game to point towards the contributions and maybe being one of the reasons why that decision was as broad as it was.
Right. And so like the nuance was just lost, right? And I totally agree with you. You want to argue that the forced parlay stuff that Underdog and Prize Picks does, everybody knows, like, I think it's called Pick'em or whatever, like forced parlay props. And they're printing millions upon millions of dollars, calling it fantasy. You want to say that that's illegal? I get it. But I'm not even sure that the Attorney General realized with this quote unquote opinion, he's also trying to take out regular fantasy, salary cap DFS, survivor pools, March Madness pools, best ball, etc. And like Alex said, when it gets so broad like that, people are just, they start to be like, well, it's not about what's right and what's wrong. It's about the money. And like when people like me get disenfranchised with politics, this is always how it goes. It's like, oh, well, this person in politics had this opinion. Is it really his opinion, or did someone pay him to say that? And I guess you could see now that you're outside, maybe you can say, or I don't even know, like, you understand why people would be disenfranchised where it seems like pay to play for really important stuff that people actually care about in their day-to-day life.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning of the show, though. There's a lot of policymakers who do not understand the nuance here between fantasy sports, which is clearly, and I ran I didn't, it's funny, DraftKings came in like 2015 and tried to make sure that fantasy sports was regulated in Colorado, and they didn't ask me to sponsor it. So I came with like a 45-page amendment that was more than in giving sort of giving the game, like the normal gamer like myself, a little bit more transparency into the platform about, like, putting the symbols next to the player's name about who was a whale and who wasn't a whale. So you had a better understanding, especially in head-to-heads, about who you were going up against. And they used to joke, they were like, you're the only legislator in the country who actually had any idea what we were talking about. But I think that's sort of what we're running into here in California, which is, I think there's policymakers who have no idea the very nuanced difference between some of the fantasy sports games and sports betting. And so a broad decision like this that catches everything in that broad net, I think can be really frustrating to, the casual gamer who, politics is as partisan and as fractured in this country as it's been in my lifetime, at least right now. And so you add that on top of taking away something that people enjoy to do on the weekends, especially as we get ready for football season, and the frustration level can get really high. I don't always agree with Gavin Newsom, but I think his comments were pretty measured. Yeah. He said, I disagree with this. But he tried to tamper down kind of the hysteria that's sort of sparked around over the last few days and said, we can figure this out. And again, we did it in Colorado. We allowed the regulator and the operators to sit down and have a very nuanced discussion about it. And again, I wasn't part of it, and I don't, all I know is it got resolved. So this is it's been resolved before. It got resolved in Colorado. California can do it. I just think that, to your point, some of these policymakers don't understand. But when they take the time to dig in, they're smart people. They'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, so there were like, I think Underdog put something out, they're like $400,000 in campaign contributions from the tribes to Rob Bonta. That's a lot of money. It's not that much money, man. If I can get anything that I want, maybe we could come up with more, and that's like where people start to go. I understand this is over a long period of time with the contributions, but still.
Well, and like my thing is contribution limits in Colorado are really, really low. So they're like $400 to a individual. My whole thing is like, listen, very rarely are the individual policymakers corrupt, right? If they are, then it's not going to just be kind of a trail of contributions. It's going to be more than that. So I think I think here it's more likely that the nuance was lost. The decision was too broad, but California can figure this out, and they're gonna. I think they can. I think they're gonna do it.
It sounds like it's going to be okay. I mean, DraftKings, I believe, already came out and said, we respect the AG's opinion, but we're going to stay in California. We think that, we're in the right here or whatever. And so I think it's going to be okay in California, but especially with the Newsom, being on our side per se, I think helps a lot. So yeah, hopefully that one's going to be okay. All right. Third one is this Illinois tax. Now, I'm not sure people outside of Illinois or even in Illinois follow what's going on here. Basically, Illinois is another state that is scraping for money, trying to find it anywhere. They recently passed a law that says sports betting operators in the state of Illinois have to pay a new tax, either 25 cents or 50 cents per bet that they accept. Now, okay, whatever, screw the operator, whatever you want to say. The operator is just going to pass this on directly to the players, either by adding 50 cents to every ticket. If you want to bet a $1 parlay, it's not going to cost you $1.50, or by taking away promos, or by building in even more juice to the parlays or to the SGPs. So consumers are the ones that will be screwed here by this new tax in Illinois. Thoughts on this one? And I would also note that if this works for Illinois, like people keep playing and losing at the same rates, other states are going to try to do this too. They're already talking about it. So what do you think about the per bet tax enacted by the state of Illinois?
Yeah, well, I'll start with a lot of states are finding themselves in tough financial places, and I'll give you one reason why. During COVID, the federal government pumped a ton of ARPA money into states. This was one-time money, but it was so much that a lot of states made decisions. Instead of doing like infrastructure one-time spending, they did a lot of programmatic spending that was long-term. And there was this kind of sense of like, well, these are going to be priorities because these are the issues that we care about now. And so when that one-time money runs out, we're going to find ways of, tightening the belt and making sure that the old programs go away, but these new ongoing programs stay. And I think what you're seeing, especially in bluer states, is that ongoing spending is creating a lot of pressure on state budgets. Plus, you have the big, beautiful bill. Plus, you have tariffs and this threat of recession. And so the amount of revenue coming into states is drying up. So you see states trying to figure out, and this was part of a larger package that Illinois did around sin taxes, right? They increased their vape and tobacco tax along with this. So I think they were trying to find easy ways of increasing revenue. Well, this is not the right way of doing it, because of course it's going to be passed along to the consumer. And you see this, I mean, FanDuel's already come out that with that 50-cent tax that it is going to be passed on. It doesn't make any, I mean, like the threshold for the tax on the operator for like the first 20 million bets, and then the next 20 it ratchets up. It kind of, again, I think shows sort of the lack of breadth of transactions that take place. In Colorado, I think this all goes back to where individual states started to set their taxing percentage on the operators. And when New York came out with that 51% tax on operators, they kind of raised the bar across the country. And now you have Illinois legislators saying, well, we thought about revisiting the operator tax, because look at New York's already up at 51%. This was just, they have the resources to pay us. This is just one more way of us getting the resources. Well, they should have then revisited the tax on the operators. They should not have done a per bet. It really hurts the recreational gamer or better, the person who's like, if you're putting in a 25, 10, 50 cent, $1, $1.50, $5 bet, over time, this is a real disincentive. It really hurts, that individual. And again, we're getting to a place where you're going to start pushing people into cheaper forms of betting, whether or not that's back with the bookie, whether or not that's, on these offshore accounts. And that was the whole reason around legalization of sports betting, was to do two things. It was to strike the balance between bringing the unregulated market into the daylight and generating needed revenue for these jurisdictions. And, like any good balancing act in any marketplace, when you overtax, you're going to start changing that behavior. And I think this is not the right approach, to, I think, trying to generate more revenue from these operators.
Right. So how does this get through at the state level? Was it a case of DraftKings and FanDuel and the casinos lobbyists dropping the ball? Is it a case of the players not being represented at all in this entire process, which is another issue altogether that, I would bring up, is like everybody has a voice. The operators have a voice. The regulars have a voice. The players don't have a voice or a seat at any of these discussions. But yeah, how does something like this get through when to you and me, it's obviously like so bad?
Well, I think a couple things. I think you have again, all these problems that we're identifying, whether or not it's on the federal level, whether or not it's in California, or whether or not it's in Illinois, there's one party control over the legislative body. So the Republicans control Congress, and there's less checks and balances. The Democrats control California. There's less checks and balances. And in Illinois, the Democrats control all of the Illinois legislature. And again, there's less checks and balances. I think if there is one thing that our democracy needs more than anything, it is a more balanced conversation between the two sides. And those checks and balances help prevent these sort of radical ideas from making their way through. I think essentially what I read about it was the legislature needed the revenue because there was a budget shortfall. They created a sin tax package that this was part of. And the lobbying teams on behalf of the industry, like the lobby firms on behalf of the industry, had no chance of stopping it. And it just was sort of steamrolled through. So I know that was sort of a soapbox about what this country needs. We need more balance in these different areas. But when it comes to finding a voice for the players, it would be awesome if some of the whales out there, because you need somebody to help kind of seed the association. But if you created an association for the players, and it was a mix of recreational, medium and large bettors all coming together to help kind of create a unified player's voice on these issues, then you would have an opportunity to, I think, get into some of these legislative bodies and have that voice represented, which has been clearly missing for the last decade since all these conversations from legalizing fantasy sports to sports betting have been taking place.
We need you to lead that group for us. We can pay you dozens of dollars
Dozens.
to lead this group for us. But yeah, so what you're saying is players get together and essentially hire a lobbying firm, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that
that's
we
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so the way it works is like let's take banks for example. You have a national trade association in DC. They're sort of in charge of all of the work lobbying Congress, and you have individual banks that pay a membership to the National Banking Association. And I think I'm just making that title up.
Yeah.
But then in each state, you have a sister association of the National Banking Association. And then in that state, you have players in that state kind of pool their resources, and they have a lobby team that lobbies the state legislature. And they're kind of taking direction and command, and they have efficiencies in operations from research to administration because the mothership in DC is kind of carrying a lot of the costs. And so you set up this sort of hub and spoke model across the country, and that's how most big industries, kind of create, this voice. Now, obviously, it's hard to do that,
Yeah.
when it's grassroots on the sort of player level. But there's so much access now to technology and social media. I don't think it would be hard, especially with these three rapid issues changing so quickly, and impacting the recreational bettor's life, and the whale's life, that you could generate some real interest in doing it. I will just say that in Illinois, the gaming associate, like DraftKings and FanDuel, they got a petition going. They got 77,000 people to sign a petition to the Illinois legislature not to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work. So I don't want to like pour cold water on the idea that I just talked about, but it can be frustrating when you sign a petition, you think it's going to make a difference, and it doesn't. I will just say petition is like the most basic form of advocacy. I think we're all going to have to kind of take it up a level if we want to be more effective.
Yes. Well, when they tried to ban DFS in the state of New York, I actually took to the streets, led by I forget who it was, but we got like 30 of us with like picket signs out in front of some building saying like "Let us play." I was one of the most humiliating and greatest experiences of my life. But yeah, that was back in 2015, trying to keep DFS legal in New York, and that actually ended up working out like last minute. I remember being up until 2 a.m, sweating this vote that was going down in the New York legislature to keep DFS legal. So yeah, gotta take it to the
Well, and
streets.
yeah, well, and it's one, it's a beautiful thing when it works. It's really frustrating when it doesn't. In Colorado, we don't face this problem because we have Tabor, and Tabor is in our state constitution, and it requires that any tax increase go to the voters. And this actually goes back to when we legalized sports betting. We had to go to the ballot to pass the tax on the casinos and the operators of the books. And if that ballot measure didn't pass, then sports betting wasn't going to be legal. And I remember on the night of the election, it only passed with 51.3% of the vote. But a lot of people on Twitter were like, "Is this going to pass? I'm so frustrated. Why is it so close?" And I remember tweeting back at them, like, "You guys love the sweat. Just like chill out, enjoy the sweat, and it's going to work out." And it did. But in Colorado, we're not in a place where we could have that per bet tax unless the legislature were to refer a ballot measure, but we would all get a say
Right.
in voting on that in a November election.
Yes. Well, that seems much more democratic, at least. Okay. Regulations if I was king. So, I've talked about this before. If I was king of the world, I would definitely make a few changes. You can argue whether it was a good idea for our country to legalize sports betting or not. I think regardless, to me, it's clear that some more regulations need to be in place. I'm going to throw a few at you here, Alec. Tell me what you think of these. First one, I think there has to be some regulation on the frequency of sportsbook advertisements on television, radio, everywhere else. I mean, it's completely out of control. I don't see gambling the same as cigarettes, but for example, we have strict regulations on cigarette ads. I can't like watch an NBA game with my kids. They're 10 and 7. I'm like, I don't really care if they see advertisements for DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever, but they're absolutely inundated with it. We're just sitting there trying to watch the NBA finals. Any thoughts on that one, Alex? Should we have regulation on advertisements for operators?
Absolutely no brainer. Now I say that it's harder. It's harder to achieve, but yes, again, we all want to strike the right balance here because I do think that people, again, I used to, I mean, when fantasy sports came under as much pressure as they did from the states, it was because they were over advertising and they
Yeah.
were saying like they were handing out those $1 million checks. I'm sure Peter was on there after winning the million maker, and when my mom is talking to me about sports betting and fantasy sports, it's a problem. I don't. My mom should not be inundated, and she should not be bringing her concerns to me. That means that the market is we're over advertising, and it's going to create pressure on the same operators who are trying to generate revenue and more customers through the advertising.
Yeah, and the more that I think about it, the states are essentially a silent partner with the books, right? Like the tax money that DK and FanDuel and BetMGM and Caesars, the amount of money that they pay to the state each year is directly proportional to how much money they're making. And so I could see on the state level being like, well, let these guys advertise where we're going to make more money the more popular their product is, and we need money for our state. So I get how there's some misaligned incentives there, but generally, like I think the cigarette regulation is actually at the federal level. They passed
Right.
something in the 70s or the 80s about the cigarette ad regulations on TV. Okay.
Yep.
Second regulation, if I was king, the content of the advertisements. I don't think you should be able to say, come win in our book, look at all these winners. When we know on a lot of books, not all, but on a lot of books, if you show you might be able to win, you are quickly and severely limited. So that would maybe, there's already, I feel like, regulations in place for false advertising and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how this falls under it, but yeah, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It goes hand in hand with the amount of advertising or the audiences that are allowed to be advertised to. And this is an easy thing to add into that broader policymaking discussion about what should and should not be included in that advertising. And I think it's very fair game. So, yes.
Uh, when you were passing the stuff in Colorado, did you ever think about the limiting stuff? Because this is like, there's a lot of people out there who don't even understand that anyone sharp, anyone winning is limited severely by a lot of these books down to 50 cents or 75 cents. Did you think about that? And maybe could we eventually put something in here? Because they're a private business. They can do whatever they want. But at the same time, they are kind of partners with the states in the public sector. So yeah, any thoughts on the whole limiting debate, which God, I'm kind of sick of it, but it's just constantly people are arguing about the limiting debate.
Yeah. So, I must have been on at some point like years ago, and this came up, and I had a stronger view than I probably do now. Of like, I really felt like it was inappropriate for any limiting to take place. But then you rightfully point out then and now that it's a private company and they can kind of do what they want. Just like if I were to walk in with no shirt and no shoes to get my hair cut at Supercuts, they could be like, hey, we're not going to serve you. But that being said, I think the what I try to do in Colorado, and I think some people are frustrated with kind of how this was set up, but my whole theory of the case, because we were the third state to regulate, or fourth state or something like that, was I wanted the healthiest marketplace possible. I wanted more operators in Colorado competing against each other, because over time that competition in the marketplace was going to benefit the player, that they were going to have multiple choices in terms of books to choose from, and then as the competition increased to get those players to play there, they were going to change. Eventually a lot of things would change, better odds, and things like loosening up some of those limits. So I did think about it back then, but more through the let's create a very competitive marketplace to create the best environment
Yeah.
of choice for the player. I think one of the challenges that we're starting to see, and eventually it was going to get there, was there's consolidation happening, and there will be consolidation that continues. But I think if there was one piece of advice for any state policymaker, would be create a competitive
Yeah.
marketplace to allow for some smaller and medium-sized operators to get into the space so that they can try to attract some of those different players in.
Well, it worked in Colorado, right? Because Circa, who does not limit people ever, um, Circa's in Colorado, and they're not in many other states whatsoever. So, yeah, I think that's a great point and a good way to set it up.
And it's because our tax rate is fair,
Right.
and we don't do these things like arbitrarily just attack the industry to try to generate more revenue to fill a budget hole.
Yeah,
And so, like, the not only is that tax in Illinois bad for the player, but that type of legislative reaction is bad for the operator and pushes that business, pushes the small medium guys out, and that's bad for the player too.
for sure. All right. Last regulation I want to run by you. I think no depositing via credit card. Now, I know this is a pipe dream because, nobody has wire or check or whatever wants to do, PayPal. People want to pay for everything with their credit card. It seems like to me though, and everybody always talks about responsible gaming, problem gaming, actual money the person has, don't let them go into debt to deposit. And I consider when you put something on a credit card, I consider that going into debt. So this one will probably never get through because of the powers that be. But I always thought it'd be better no depositing via credit card. Any thoughts on that one, Alec?
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with problem and responsible gaming. I think one promise I made when I was running the legislation through, and we had to go back and tweak some things over the years when I was in the legislature, was I ran a responsible gaming bill to get more resources into the responsible and problem gaming nonprofits and services across the state, because no one can say that sports betting isn't addictive at some level. I think my point of view is, like, you can leave that up to the individual. The state doesn't have to tell me what I can and can't do. You have to believe that most people can choose moderation. But that being said, you need to do things to help support those where it gets away from you a little bit. And so, I think protecting the person who goes on tilt from being able to put everything on their credit card is common sense. And I think making sure that everyone's investing as much as they can in problem gaming on a state level is good. And the last thing I'll say is there needs to be better coordination nationwide on problem gaming. Every time you're like listening to a podcast, you're seeing some advertisement, every state has a different number. Uh, uh, it's hard to really narrow in on how to get access to those resources. It would be helpful if the federal government or if some of these national associations did more in leading to create some less patchwork around this to make sure that people have access to the services that are available.
100%. Those are mine. Any other things that you wish were out there around the sports gambling lawmaking regulations space that come to mind? If not, no worries.
No, I think you really, I think, covered a lot. I mean, there's so many. I mean, these three issues. Again, I'm kind of been away from the space a little bit. When I was starting to dig in, I was like, there's a lot of pressure on the industry right now, and the pressure that we're seeing in California between the tribes and the state and the operators, like, that's been around for a long time. Those types of pressures will never just go away completely, but the more we can open up conversations and dialogues, the more we can realize that all these problems that we talked about today, are really solvable if people would just come together and talk them through. So there's no additional, I think, ideas that I have at the moment in terms of where the industry can go offensively. I'm seeing, just at this point, it's like, how does everyone come together in a defensive way to make sure that some of these bad trends we're seeing, to your point from earlier, don't start to spread across the country? Because in the end, what you're going to do is push everything back into
Yeah.
the unregulated marketplace where people are getting hurt, people aren't getting paid, and there's no representation from the legal side for the customer. And that's and then there's no tax revenue going towards, like here in Colorado, we put it all towards our water plan, and we've generated more, I think, tax dollars for our water plan than anyone could have imagined, and that's a long-term investment in the state of Colorado and for future generations, and we can all be proud of that. So you don't want those good things that have come out of this to go away.
Oh, I mean, the last few weeks has been a bookie's dream. I mean, the bookies are like sitting here. The street bookies are licking their lips about what's been going on the last few weeks on the legislative front. All right. Really, really appreciate the time, Alec. Thanks so much for being here and giving us some context around what's going on. I doubt you want to be found, but if you do want to be found, you can tell people where to find you. If you don't, you can just pass.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can. I'm still on Twitter, just Alec Garnett. You can always, if you just Google me, I think everything is still online. You can always reach out to me. DMing me is the best. That's how Adam reached out. I'm always happy to answer questions. Again, this is a community that I love dearly, and way back when I came in second in your guys's
Yes. In the
uh,
DFS Edge listener
yeah,
league.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's like
I remember.
I told my colleagues today, they're like, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I'm like, "Well, I'm jumping on this podcast with like the most famous guy in the country," and I'm like, "But it's not the first time I've been on the podcast. I was on it because I came in second, and he like mentioned my name." So yeah, I've been around a long time. I care deeply about this community, and so now, even though I'm a citizen, I still love connecting with everybody. So don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, perfect. Hashtag one of us. For Alec, for producer Luke, for producer Ryan, I am Adam. Be sure to contact your representatives. Good luck, everybody.